The day I found Sarah's old camera, I was just looking for a way to feel close to her again. It had been 3 months since the funeral, and the house still felt hollow, every room echoing with the absence of her laughter, her voice, her gentle touch. I'd been sorting through boxes in the attic, dust motes swirling in the sunlight, when I spotted the battered leather case tucked behind a stack of her favorite books. My heart twisted as I opened it, the familiar weight of the camera in my hands bringing back a flood of memories. Road trips, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings when she'd snap candid shots of me making pancakes. I decided to take the film to Mr. Harris's photo shop downtown, thinking maybe the pictures would help me remember the good times, maybe even help me heal. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, and Mr. Harris greeted me with his usual warm smile, but when I handed him the camera, something in his expression changed. He promised to have the photos ready in a couple of days, and I left, not thinking much of it. But when I returned, the shop was empty except for Mr. Harris, who looked pale and nervous, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected someone to burst in at any moment. He didn't hand me the envelope over the counter. Instead, he motioned for me to follow him into the back room, his hands shaking as he locked the door behind us. He pressed a sealed envelope into my hands, his voice barely above a whisper as he said, "Don't show these to anyone else." I stared at him, confused, but he just shook his head, refusing to explain. My heart pounded as I left the shop, the envelope heavy in my pocket, my mind racing with questions. What could possibly be in those photos that would make Mr. Harris so afraid? I drove home in a daze, barely noticing the world outside my window, the envelope burning a hole in my jacket. I sat at the kitchen table for what felt like hours, just staring at it, afraid to open it, afraid not to. Finally, with trembling hands, I broke the seal, not knowing that in the next few minutes, my entire world would be turned upside down. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Inside the envelope was a stack of glossy prints and a small USB drive. The first few photos were exactly what I'd hoped for. Sarah's bright smile, her arms around me at the lake, her eyes crinkling with laughter as she snapped a selfie in our old kitchen. But then the images changed. There was Sarah, standing in a dimly lit parking lot, talking to a man I didn't recognize. The next photo showed them exchanging what looked like a thick envelope, Sarah's face tense, the man's features half hidden in shadow. My hands shook as I flipped through the rest. Sarah looking over her shoulder, the man glancing at the camera, a sense of urgency in every frame. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. There were several video files, each labeled with a date. I clicked on the first one, and Sarah's face filled the screen. She looked tired, scared, her voice trembling as she said, "If you're watching this, I'm sorry. I never wanted you to find out this way." My heart dropped into my stomach as she talked about protecting me and the truth, her words growing more frantic with each passing second. The last video ended with her in tears, whispering, "Forgive me." I sat there, numb, the weight of grief and confusion pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. Whatever secret Sarah had been hiding, it was big enough to terrify Mr. Harris, big enough to haunt her in her final days, and now it was mine to carry. I didn't know what to do, but I knew one thing for certain. Nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun had set, the only light in the room coming from the laptop screen, Sarah's tear-streaked face frozen in the last frame of her video. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and my mind kept looping through the images and words I'd just seen. Sarah in that parking lot, the envelope, the man's shadowed face, her voice breaking as she begged for forgiveness. I wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation, that maybe she'd been helping a friend or caught up in something she didn't understand, but the fear in her eyes told me otherwise. I replayed the videos, searching for clues, for anything that might make sense of the chaos now swirling inside me. In one clip, Sarah mentioned keeping you safe from them and not letting the past destroy us, her words cryptic and desperate. I paused the video, zooming in on the background, and noticed a sign for a law office reflected in a window behind her. The name was blurry, but I could just make out the letters, Langley and Associates. My heart pounded as I realized this was the same name on the briefcase in the photos. I grabbed my phone and searched for the firm, finding an address just a few miles away. I knew I should probably call someone, maybe a friend, maybe the police, but I couldn't bring myself to share any of this yet. It felt too raw, too personal, and I was terrified of what I might find if I kept digging. Still, the fire inside me wouldn't let go. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I drove to the law office, the streets empty and silent, my headlights cutting through the darkness. The building was closed, but a light was on in one of the upstairs windows. I sat in my car, watching, wondering if the man from the photos was inside. My phone buzzed, and I jumped, nearly dropping it. An unknown number flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered, my voice barely steady. "Stop looking into this," a distorted voice warned. "You don't know what you're getting into. Leave it alone, or you'll regret it." The call ended before I could respond, leaving me with a cold knot of fear in my stomach. I drove home, every shadow on the road suddenly menacing, every memory of Sarah now tinged with doubt. Back in the kitchen, I spread the photos out on the table, studying every detail. In one, I noticed a small tattoo on the man's wrist, a symbol I didn't recognize. I snapped a picture of it with my phone, determined to find out who he was. I barely slept that night, haunted by Sarah's voice, the threat from the stranger, and the growing realization that my wife had been living a life I knew nothing about. By morning, exhaustion had settled into a grim resolve. I would find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I owed Sarah that much, and I owed it to myself. The fire inside me was burning hotter than ever, and I knew there was no turning back. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a sense of dread that clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't shake the image of Sarah's haunted eyes or the echo of that threatening phone call. I made coffee I barely tasted, then sat at the table, staring at the photos and replaying the videos, searching for anything I'd missed. The tattoo on the man's wrist nagged at me, so I searched online for hours, scrolling through images of symbols and insignias until I finally found a match. It belonged to a private security firm, one known for handling sensitive matters for wealthy clients. My mind raced. What was Sarah doing with someone like that? I decided to visit Langley and Associates in person, hoping to get a glimpse of the man from the photos. I dressed in my best shirt, trying to look like someone with legitimate business, and drove to the office, my heart thudding with every mile. The receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile, but when I asked about David Langley, her eyes flickered with something like fear. "Mr. Langley is in a meeting," she said, her voice tight. "Can I take a message?" I pressed, asking if he'd met with my wife, Sarah, but she grew evasive, insisting she couldn't share client information. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of a man in a suit walking down the hall. The same man from the photos, the tattoo just visible beneath his cuff. Our eyes met for a split second, and I saw a flash of recognition, maybe even guilt, before he disappeared into an office. I left the building, my hands shaking, and sat in my car, trying to steady my breathing. My phone buzzed again, another unknown number. This time, the message was a text. Last warning. Stop digging. I stared at the screen, anger flaring in my chest. Whoever these people were, they were scared, and that meant I was getting close to something important. I drove home, adrenaline still surging, and started digging through Sarah's things again. In a stack of old books, I found a small envelope taped to the inside cover of her favorite novel. Inside was a safe deposit box key and a note in Sarah's handwriting, "If anything happens to me, go to the bank. Trust no one." My hands trembled as I realized Sarah had been preparing for this, whatever this was. I knew what I had to do next. The fire inside me was no longer just about grief. It was about justice, about finding out what my wife had been so afraid of, and why she'd gone to such lengths to protect me. I promised myself, right then and there, that I wouldn't stop until I had answers, no matter how dark the truth turned out to be. I barely waited for the bank to open before I was standing at the counter, the safe deposit box key clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles ached. The teller led me to a small, private room and brought out the box, her polite smile fading when she saw the tension in my face. Alone, I opened the box and found a thick stack of legal documents, another envelope, and a handwritten letter from Sarah. My heart hammered as I unfolded the letter, her familiar script shaky but determined. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't protect you from what's coming," she wrote. "I found out about the inheritance, money that was supposed to go to you, but someone in my family is trying to steal it. I didn't know who to trust, so I went to David Langley for help, but I think he's working with them. Please, Michael, don't let them win. I love you." My hands shook as I read the rest, Sarah detailing how she discovered a fake trust set up in my name, with Tom, her brother, listed as the beneficiary if anything happened to her. The legal documents confirmed it, forged signatures, altered dates, and a paper trail that led straight to Tom and Langley. There were also more photos, this time of Tom meeting with Langley in a coffee shop, the two of them exchanging envelopes just like Sarah had in the parking lot. I felt sick, the betrayal cutting deeper than any wound. I remembered every awkward family dinner, every time Tom had looked at me with thinly veiled resentment, and now it all made sense. Sarah had been fighting to protect me, and it had cost her peace in her final days. I stuffed the documents and photos back into the envelope, my mind racing. I knew I needed help, but I didn't trust anyone in Sarah's family, and the police felt like a risk I couldn't take. Not yet. I drove home, the weight of the secret pressing down on me, and called the only person I could think of, Miss Carter, an old friend of my father's and a lawyer with a reputation for integrity. I told her everything, my voice shaking as I laid out the evidence. She listened in silence, then said, "Bring everything to my office. We'll get to the bottom of this, but you need to be careful. If Tom and Langley are willing to go this far, they won't stop now." As I hung up, I realized just how alone I was in this fight, but the fire inside me burned hotter than ever. I owed it to Sarah to see this through, to make sure her courage wasn't wasted, and to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I gathered the documents, the photos, and Sarah's letter, and prepared for a battle I never saw coming, determined that this time I wouldn't let fear or grief stop me from fighting back. I drove to Ms. Carter's office with the envelope on the passenger seat, my mind a storm of anger, grief, and determination. The city seemed colder, every face on the street a potential threat, every shadow a reminder that I was now tangled in something far bigger than I'd ever imagined. Ms. Carter greeted me with a firm handshake and a look of genuine concern, ushering me into her office and locking the door behind us. I laid out the documents, the photos, and Sarah's letter on her desk, watching as she read through everything with a practiced eye. Her expression darkened as she pieced together the timeline, tracing the forged trust, the altered signatures, and the money trail that led straight to Tom and David Langley. "This is serious, Michael," she said quietly. "They've committed fraud, and if we can prove it, they could face prison time. But you need to be careful. People who go to these lengths don't give up easily." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle on my shoulders. We spent hours reviewing every detail, Ms. Carter making copies and taking notes, her confidence giving me a sliver of hope. She explained that we'd need more evidence to make the case airtight, emails, bank records, anything that could tie Tom and Langley together beyond a shadow of a doubt. As I left her office, she pressed a business card into my hand. "If anything happens, call me. Don't talk to anyone else about this, not even friends. Trust is a luxury you can't afford right now." I drove home, my nerves frayed, and found myself replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Tom, every moment that now seemed suspicious in hindsight. That night, I couldn't sleep. I scoured Sarah's old laptop, searching for anything she might have left behind. In a hidden folder, I found a series of emails between Tom and Langley, their tone cold and transactional, discussing the transfer and keeping Michael in the dark. My stomach turned as I read Tom's words. "He'll never see it coming. Once Sarah's gone, it's ours." Rage and heartbreak warred inside me, but I saved every file, forwarding them to Ms. Carter with shaking hands. The next morning, I confronted Tom at his office, unable to hold back any longer. He tried to play dumb, but when I mentioned the emails and the safe deposit box, his face went pale. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, but I saw the fear in his eyes. "Let the past stay buried, Michael. You don't want to make this worse for yourself." I left before I did something I'd regret, but his threat only fueled my resolve. I called Ms. Carter, who told me we now had enough to move forward. "We'll file suit, but be ready. Tom will fight dirty, and Langley has powerful friends. This won't be easy." As I hung up, I realized I was truly at war with my own family, but the fire inside me was now ablaze. I would not let Sarah's sacrifice be in vain, and I would not let Tom or anyone else steal what she had fought so hard to protect. The battle for the truth had only just begun. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of snakes, every step more dangerous than the last. Ms. Carter worked quickly, filing the initial lawsuit and securing a court order to freeze the trust assets before Tom or Langley could move the money. The legal paperwork was a blur of signatures and affidavits, but I trusted her completely. She was the only person who seemed to understand the stakes, the only one who believed me without question. Meanwhile, Tom's response was swift and vicious. He started calling me at all hours, leaving voicemails that swung between pleading and threatening, his voice cracking with desperation. "You're tearing this family apart, Michael. Just walk away before you ruin everything." But I couldn't walk away, not after everything Sarah had done to protect me. The pressure mounted as rumors began to swirl in the community. Old friends stopped returning my calls, and at the grocery store, I caught people whispering behind my back, their eyes full of suspicion. Tom was telling everyone that I was trying to steal from the family, that I'd manipulated Sarah and was now out for revenge. The humiliation stung, but I refused to let it break me. One night, as I sat alone in the dark, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You're making a mistake. Back off, or you'll regret it." I forwarded the message to Ms. Carter, who told me to document everything and stay vigilant. The next morning, I found my car's tires slashed, a silent warning that the threats were getting closer to home. I called the police, but with no witnesses and no proof, there was nothing they could do. I felt more isolated than ever, but the fire inside me only grew. I spent my days gathering every scrap of evidence I could find: bank statements, old voicemails, even Sarah's handwritten notes. Late one night, Sarah's best friend Lisa called me out of the blue. She said she'd been afraid to get involved, but she couldn't stay silent any longer. She told me Sarah had confided in her about the inheritance and her fears about Tom and Langley. Then, in a trembling voice, Lisa revealed she had something for me, a secret audio recording of Sarah and Tom arguing about the trust, recorded just weeks before Sarah died. When I listened to it, Sarah's voice was clear and strong, refusing to let Tom bully her, demanding he tell the truth. Tom's voice, on the other hand, was full of venom and panic. It was the final piece I needed. I sent the recording to Ms. Carter, who said it would be a game-changer in court. As I sat in the quiet of my living room, clutching the phone, I realized that even though I was surrounded by enemies, I was no longer alone. Sarah's courage, Lisa's loyalty, and Ms. Carter's determination were with me. The fire inside me was now a beacon, guiding me through the darkness, and I knew I was ready for whatever came next. The lawsuit became the talk of the town, and suddenly my life felt like it was under a microscope, every move scrutinized, every word twisted by gossip and suspicion. Tom's smear campaign was relentless. He called distant relatives, old friends, even Sarah's childhood neighbors, spinning a story that painted me as a greedy widower trying to cash in on tragedy. Invitations to family gatherings stopped coming, and I could feel the chill in the air at the grocery store, the bank, even at church. It hurt more than I expected, but I refused to let shame or loneliness stop me. Instead, I focused on the case, working with Ms. Carter to organize the mountain of evidence we'd collected. The audio recording from Lisa was our ace, but Ms. Carter wanted to be sure we had every angle covered. She subpoenaed bank records, traced wire transfers, and even hired a forensic accountant to follow the money trail from the fake trust to Tom's secret accounts. The deeper we dug, the more brazen the fraud became. Tom and Langley had siphoned off thousands, laundering it through shell companies and offshore accounts. The evidence was overwhelming, but the emotional toll was crushing. I missed Sarah more than ever, wishing I could ask her what to do, wishing she could see that I was fighting for her, not just for myself. One night, as I was sorting through old photos, I found a note Sarah had tucked behind a picture frame. In her handwriting, she'd written, "If you're reading this, I know you're scared. But you're stronger than you think. Don't let them win." Her words hit me like a wave, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry, not just for what I'd lost, but for the strength I'd found. The next day, Lisa stopped by with a casserole and a hug, her support a lifeline in the storm. "You're not alone, Michael," she said. "Sarah believed in you, and so do I." With the trial date set, Ms. Carter warned me that Tom's lawyers would try to drag my name through the mud, but she promised we had the truth on our side. As I prepared for the courtroom battle ahead, I realized that the fire inside me wasn't just about anger or revenge anymore. It was about love, about honoring Sarah's memory, and about refusing to let fear or lies define my life. I was ready to face Tom, Langley, and anyone else who tried to stand in my way, no matter how much it hurt or how high the cost. The day of the trial arrived with a gray sky and a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't shake, but I walked into the courthouse with my head held high, determined to see this through for Sarah and for myself. The courtroom was packed. Family, neighbors, even a few reporters drawn by the scandal, and I could feel the weight of every eye on me as I took my seat beside Ms. Carter. Tom sat across the aisle, his face a mask of smug confidence, flanked by his high-priced attorney and David Langley, who avoided my gaze. The proceedings began with Tom's lawyer painting me as a manipulative widower, suggesting I'd pressured Sarah into changing her will and was now trying to steal from her grieving family. The accusations stung, but I held my ground, letting Ms. Carter do what she did best. She presented the evidence methodically. The forged trust documents, the emails between Tom and Langley, the bank records showing the money trail, and finally, the audio recording of Sarah and Tom's argument. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah's voice echoed from the speakers, her courage and clarity cutting through the lies. Tom's face went pale, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Under cross-examination, Ms. Carter dismantled Tom's story, exposing every contradiction and forcing him to admit he'd been in contact with Langley about the trust. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke from the heart, telling the judge about Sarah's fears, her determination to protect me, and the pain of discovering her own brother's betrayal. I could see tears in the eyes of some jurors, and even the judge seemed moved by my words. Langley tried to distance himself, but the evidence was overwhelming, and his evasions only made him look guiltier. By the end of the day, it was clear the tide had turned. Ms. Carter's closing argument was powerful, reminding everyone that this case was about more than money. It was about justice, love, and the courage to stand up for what's right. As the judge called a recess before the verdict, I sat in the hallway, exhausted but hopeful, the fire inside me burning brighter than ever. I knew that whatever happened next, I had honored Sarah's memory and fought for the truth, and that was something no one could ever take away from me. The hours waiting for the verdict felt like an eternity, every tick of the courthouse clock echoing in my chest. But when the judge finally returned and the courtroom settled into a tense hush, I knew my life was about to change forever. The judge's voice was steady as he read the decision. The evidence was clear, the trust was fraudulent, and Tom and David Langley were found guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted theft. The inheritance was restored to me, and the judge ordered criminal charges to be filed against both men. For a moment, I just sat there, numb, as the reality washed over me. Justice had been served, and Sarah's courage had not been in vain. Tom's face crumpled, his bravado gone, and Langley looked like a man who'd finally run out of places to hide. As the courtroom emptied, people who had once doubted me now offered quiet apologies and handshakes, their eyes full of regret and relief. Ms. Carter hugged me, her voice thick with emotion as she said, "You did it, Michael. You honored Sarah, and you stood up for yourself." I left the courthouse into the cool afternoon air, feeling lighter than I had in months, but also strangely empty. So much of my life had been consumed by this fight that I wasn't sure what to do next. That evening, I drove to the cemetery and sat by Sarah's grave, the verdict papers in my lap. I told her everything, my voice breaking as I promised that her bravery had made all the difference, that I would never forget what she'd done for me. For the first time since her death, I let myself grieve without the weight of suspicion or betrayal, letting the tears come freely, feeling the pain and the relief mingle in my chest. The next morning, the news spread quickly, and the community's opinion shifted almost overnight. Neighbors who had avoided me now waved from their porches, and old friends reached out to reconnect, their support a balm to wounds I hadn't realized were still open. I knew the road ahead would still be hard. There would be appeals, more paperwork, and the slow process of rebuilding trust. But for the first time, I felt hope. The fire inside me, once fueled by anger and loss, was now a quiet strength, a promise to myself and to Sarah that I would keep moving forward, no matter what. With the trial behind me and the inheritance finally restored, I found myself standing at a crossroads, unsure how to fill the emptiness left by months of fighting and years of grief. The house felt different now, lighter, as if Sarah's spirit had finally been freed from the shadows of betrayal and secrecy. I spent the first few days in a daze, sorting through paperwork, answering calls from lawyers and distant relatives, and fielding awkward apologies from people who had once believed Tom's lies. But as the dust settled, I realized I didn't want to let bitterness or anger define the rest of my life. I decided to use part of the inheritance to start a scholarship in Sarah's name, something that would help others who had faced loss and hardship find a new beginning. The process of setting up the fund gave me a sense of purpose, and I found myself reconnecting with people in the community, sharing Sarah's story not as a tale of betrayal, but as one of resilience and hope. I even reached out to a few family members who had sided with Tom, choosing forgiveness over resentment, and while some relationships would never be the same, others began to heal in small, unexpected ways. Lisa became a regular presence in my life, her friendship a steady comfort as I navigated the slow process of rebuilding. We spent long evenings talking about Sarah, laughing at old memories, and sometimes just sitting in silence, grateful for the peace that had finally settled over us. I started volunteering at a local grief support group, sharing my experience with others who were struggling to find their way after loss. It was there that I met Anna, a kind, soft-spoken woman who had lost her husband to cancer. Our connection was gentle and unhurried, built on mutual understanding and respect. For the first time since Sarah's death, I felt the possibility of happiness flicker in my chest, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find joy again. The fire inside me, once a raging inferno of pain and anger, had become something steadier, a source of strength, compassion, and the courage to keep moving forward, no matter what the future held. As the months passed, life began to settle into a new rhythm, one that felt both unfamiliar and quietly hopeful. The scholarship in Sarah's name was awarded to its first recipient, a young woman who reminded me so much of Sarah, bright, determined, and full of dreams. I attended the award ceremony, standing in front of a small crowd and sharing a few words about Sarah's kindness and resilience, feeling her presence in every smile and every tear. The house, once a place of sorrow, slowly filled with laughter again. Lisa and I hosted small dinners, inviting friends and neighbors who had stood by me, and even some who hadn't, choosing to let go of old grudges in favor of new beginnings. Anna and I grew closer, our friendship deepening into something more, though we moved slowly, both of us cautious but willing to risk our hearts again. We spent weekends exploring the countryside, talking for hours about everything and nothing, and I found myself looking forward to each new day in a way I hadn't since before Sarah got sick. There were still moments when grief would sneak up on me, a song on the radio, a familiar scent, a memory triggered by the changing seasons, but instead of knocking me down, those moments reminded me of how far I'd come. I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting or moving on, but about carrying Sarah's love and lessons with me as I built a new life. The community, once divided by suspicion and gossip, began to come together again, united by the story of what had happened and the hope that had grown from it. I volunteered more, helped with local projects, and found a sense of belonging I'd thought I'd lost forever. The fire inside me, once a desperate need for answers and justice, had become a quiet, steady warmth, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, it's possible to find light, to forgive, and to love again. As I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the fields, I whispered a thank you to Sarah, knowing she would always be a part of me, and promised to keep living, loving, and honoring her memory in everything I did. The first anniversary of Sarah's passing arrived on a gentle spring morning, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window and painting golden stripes across the floor where she used to dance while making coffee. I woke early, the house quiet except for the distant sound of birdsong, and let myself remember her without the sharp edge of pain that had haunted me for so long. Instead, I felt a bittersweet gratitude for the years we'd shared, the laughter, the struggles, and even the secrets that had nearly broken me but ultimately set me free. I spent the morning tending the small garden I'd planted in her memory, each flower a living tribute to her resilience and beauty. As I worked, Anna joined me, her presence a gentle comfort, and together we pulled weeds, watered the roses, and shared stories about the people we'd loved and lost. Later, Lisa arrived with fresh bread and a bouquet of wildflowers, and the three of us sat on the porch, the air filled with the scent of lilacs and the warmth of quiet companionship. We talked about Sarah, her stubbornness, her kindness, the way she could light up a room with her laughter, and I realized that, for the first time, I could speak her name without my voice breaking. After lunch, I drove to the cemetery, carrying a single white rose and the camera that had started it all. I knelt by Sarah's grave, the grass soft beneath my knees, and told her everything, about the trial, the truth, the forgiveness, and the new life I was building. I thanked her for her courage, for loving me enough to fight for me even when she was afraid, and for teaching me that real strength comes from facing the darkness and choosing to keep going anyway. I promised her that I would keep living, keep loving, and keep honoring her memory, not just with words but with actions, with kindness, with honesty, with the fire she had sparked inside me. As I stood to leave, I snapped a photo of her headstone, the sunlight glinting off the polished stone, and felt a sense of peace settle over me. That evening, Anna and I hosted a small gathering at the house, inviting friends, neighbors, and even a few family members who had found their way back into my life. We shared a meal, raised a glass to Sarah, and celebrated not just her memory but the hope and healing that had grown from so much pain. As the sun set and the sky turned a deep, endless blue, I stood in the garden, surrounded by laughter and love, and realized that the fire inside me was no longer about anger or loss. It was about resilience, about the courage to forgive, and about the quiet, steady determination to build something beautiful from the ashes of heartbreak. I looked around at the faces of the people who had helped me find my way. Anna, Lisa, Ms. Carter, and even those who had once doubted me, and felt a deep, abiding gratitude for the journey I had taken. I knew there would still be hard days, moments when grief would return like a sudden storm, but I also knew that I was no longer alone, and that I had the strength to face whatever came next. As the stars appeared overhead, I whispered a final thank you to Sarah, to everyone who had stood by me, and to the fire inside me that had carried me through the darkest nights and into the light of a new beginning. The camera, once a symbol of secrets and sorrow, now rested on the mantel as a reminder that the truth, no matter how painful, can set us free, and that love, in all its forms, is always worth fighting for.